to his feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland went to the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live sports and TV for half the cost of cable. There's no contract and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. The offseason keeps rolling on. We got more team previews for you, and I'm very excited for our guest today. But before we get to that, I got to introduce my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, man. We podcasted yesterday. I'm not in season form. I gotta get up there. You know, I gotta get the energy where it needs to be. Thank God we have a guest because I can just kind of bail.
I can tell you're winded, man. Like you've got to start firing off some takes when you go take the dog for a walk or whatever. Like just get that cardio up. Get your takes.
It's like running with ankle weights. I would just be firing off takes to the neighbors.
Well, the good news is we got one of our favorite guests back on the podcast, ready to carry the load, ready to help us through this podcast from Dime on Uproxx as well as Liberty Ballers. It's Jackson Frank. Jackson, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. I'm glad that I'm on the second night of the first back-to-back of the year. It sounds like the two of you are kind of getting your wits about you on that. You're in Indiana on a cold October night and you're not ready for that second back-to-back. So I'm happy to carry the load for sure.
Well, every time the Cavs play the Sixers, it's usually some sort of schedule loss or weird thing like that. So this is a little bit fitting to have you on for it. It's funny. I was searching your name just to see, with Cleveland Cavaliers, just to see, when last time we had you on the podcast was. And one of the first links that came up was IMDb. Apparently, there's an IMDb thread for every time we post a podcast and Chase Down with Jackson. Yeah, it's on IMDb. I have no idea, Cart.
Are you making this up?
I'm not. And that was one of the first things that came up. So that kind of excited me. Our names aren't on there, but yours is, Jackson.
I didn't know I was on IMDb, but now I am. What an accomplishment, I suppose.
Well, I just wanted to brighten your day. It's Tuesday. We're still in the off season. We're waiting for NBA action.
What is this?
There is the potential for moves in the NBA, but there isn't really any actual news outside of what's going on in the World Cup as Carter continues to scan IMDb for the next 45 minutes.
Why is this happening?
I don't know, but it's not great audio for our audio only.
We're something special, I'll tell you what.
There you go. But Jackson, I want to start things off by talking about the Cavs, which we do often on this podcast. I want to know what you made of the Cavs offseason, because I know you've been high on this core when we've had you on in the past. You've sung the praises of Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and what they got going on. But I really want to get kind of what your read is on the moves the Cavs made this summer.
Yeah, I think, everyone who watched the playoff shooting against the Knicks, even casually, could tell that they needed more shooting. I think particularly in the front court on the wings, and because of that lack of shooting, it made life really hard for their core four. And that's not to say that the only reasons Garland or Mitchell or Mobley or Allen had their struggles against the Knicks were because of that shooting, but it certainly exacerbated them. So on the first day of free agency, or first couple of days, they clearly tried to address those issues and signed a couple of really good shooters. Obviously Max Strus's numbers have ebbed and flowed, but he's a guy who's with a lot of versatility, a lot of volume. And then Niang's a guy who's basically been 41% all 4 or 5 years throughout his career in the NBA. And always has a big high 3-point rate, even though he's more of a bench guy. So I think that'll help a lot. And the goal would be between the added spacing there and some more development from the core four, particularly Evan Mobley, maybe Darius Garland as the focus of the development there. You can get over that hump and you can become a team that is, making second, third round and beyond. I think there's kind of it's the classic once expectations happen, you kind of get restless, right? Like the Cavs 2 years ago at this point, we're in the play-in, we're a really fun team, and then they made the big move for Donovan Mitchell. I think everyone kind of expected them to be really good, and because of how good they were in the regular season, how good some of their advanced metrics were, you get restless after a pretty ugly playoff showing. But it takes time. It's really hard to win in the playoffs. So I think they've made some good moves, but it's still going to come down to how good can Evan Mobley get offensively. How good can Darius Garland be? Like what kind of scoring volume can he handle? I think that was kind of the biggest thing in that first round series. Is I don't think his numbers were bad, but he wasn't able to do and produce as many opportunities as the Cavs needed. And that's kind of the big thing there. And obviously, Jared Allen struggles and kind of Donovan Mitchell's shot making struggles in conjunction with his point of attack defense that regressed. I like the offseason a lot, but I do think it's going to come down to that core four still. But the hope, like I said, is that those two big offseason additions plus Ty Jerome can make life easier for the core group there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I saw a friend of the podcast, Mac Perry, posted today every single Max Strus made three from last season, and it was over 41 minutes, and that just made me so happy. I'm like, volume 3-point shooting. That's what we've needed for a while. Like that's a lot of fun. I think it's going to come down to how good the core plays, but I just feel like they're in a better position to kind of explore the space, right? Like Mobley's playmaking is going to be better with more space. Garland being able to get where he wants to on the court and make others better, that's going to be easier. And obviously, one part of that offseason is the addition of Georges Niang, who came over from the Sixers after spending the last 2 years there. I want to know what you think Cavs fans should expect from Niang. How do you kind of envision his role with this team, or what do you think the best possible use of his talents would be with this roster?
I think he's a really good 7th or 8th man. The Sixers and the Jazz have had their own struggles the last couple of years, but last few years in the playoffs. But Niang's been a part of some really good teams in both those organizations. As much as you can criticize and should criticize the Jazz and Sixers for their failures, making the second round is a tough thing to do. Only 8 teams do it every year. And so for Niang to be a key part of both of those teams, or both those groups or appearances, is a testament to him. He's a guy that I think in certain matchups can close. He definitely did that at times for the Sixers. I think he was really important to when they did have success offensively in the second round against the Celtics this past year. He was usually kind of at the hardest of those lineups. Just his ability to shoot quick trigger threes, add a little more on the move stuff this past year. I think got a little bit quicker. We're not looking at a guy who's going to be the Duncan Robinson type necessarily flying around screens, but can do a little bit of that stuff. I thought he improved putting the ball on the deck this past year somewhat, got a little quicker. The rebounding, I do think, is a big issue. Obviously, the Cavs had their issues on that, in that facet. The Sixers have their own issues, and so Niang just isn't a very explosive guy. He's not much of a traditional athlete, of course. So that hurts, but I thought he also improved some of his off the bounce game. One thing I'm really looking forward to with him and Strus is kind of how the coaching staff leverages their shooting with guys like Mitchell and Garland, because there wasn't a lot of front court shooting last year. And so if you're not really able to switch those actions, because, a guy like Strus can maybe flow into a pick and roll, or Niang kind of likes to do this weird post up into a hook shot. That doesn't always look pretty, but kind of went down at a semi-regular rate last year. That helps a lot. I think part of the issue, with trying to involve Garland and Mitchell in a lot of actions, is you can just switch that right and put more length on them. But if you have a bigger guy who could be a front court shooter and kind of involve them together in actions, it makes it tougher for defenses. So I like Niang a lot, of the 7th, 8th guy who I think will close certain games. If, let's say maybe you don't want to have both, Mobley and Allen out there, for at the same time, just because space and issues, or one of them's, resting or in foul trouble, things like that. You can put the Niang at the 4 pretty comfortably. And, I think you have, and I think at the same time, I see some parallels, and not in the same way at all necessarily. Like that's how did I phrase this without contradicting myself? I see some parallels in the way that when marketing came over 2 years, they tried to use him with the 3, and obviously he turned out to be a pretty dang good wing defender. But the idea initially was, okay, let's have Mobley now kind of cover for him and close down the space he has to, address. And I think that's going to be similar with Niang at times, to play the 3. And maybe he's not great at the 3, but because you have 2 backline enforcers, that it doesn't have to have as much responsibility on Niang's plate. So that could be kind of the goal there. And I really am curious to kind of see what the trade-off is defensively, because for all of maybe some of the weird decisions the Cavs made and Jared Allen made with his help positioning and stuff, the Cavs still ended up with the best defensive rating in the playoffs. No, it's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but the defense was not the issue at all. It was the fact they couldn't drop a ball in an ocean from a boat. So I'm
Even
curious
with
kind of
and for those that don't know how those metrics work, that accounts for defensive rebounding. So like even though they got decimated on the boards, they still had the best defense. So like I do think that like even accounting for that, like they were still amazing on that end.
So I'm fascinated to kind of see if you're playing a Coro in less time because you worry about the fact that he gets ignored, even though he is a very good point of attack defender and has improved his numbers as a shooter. What's kind of trade off there with a Niang, maybe the 3 or a Strus, who are much lesser defenders, especially at the point of attack, where the Cavs don't have much beyond Okoro, especially now that Lamar Stevens is gone. Kind of what the trade-off is there. I think it's a worthwhile trade-off. I think both of those guys are better players at this stage of their career than Okoro. But I am curious to what degree, like, can you just bank on Allen and Mobley covering enough? Can you just be content to have guys like Tatum or Trey or Brunson crush you from mid-range, but they're not getting anything at the rim, and that's enough for your offense or your defense to survive with a much better offense around them. So that's kind of what I'm curious, but I do think the Cavs have had a really good offseason. I think Niang is a guy that got a lot of flack from Sixers people, even some writers at times, because of his liability as a defender in space and rebounding issues and whatnot, but just was a guy who I thought always made things a lot easier on the aggregate for key players like a Harden and Embiid and a Maxey. And so I think he's going to do the same thing for the Cavs. And I just think he's a really consummate role player, and also a guy that I think gives you an edge. Loves the trash talk, doesn't back down from stuff. I'm not saying that's something the Cavs necessarily lack, but I don't think it's anything you don't ever want. I don't think you never.
It's
really
a team of nice young men, Jackson.
And I think Niang is a guy that gives you a bit of an edge and has that playoff experience, even if he's not gone super deep. He's played in a lot of playoff series at this point in his career already. So I really like that signing. It's a guy that I think the Sixers are going to miss a lot, and the Cavs will benefit a lot from having around and being on in the rotation.
Something I'm interested to hear, because obviously we have you here to talk Sixers, but like you are really an astute observer of the league, and you've written some of my favorite pieces about the Cavs over the last couple years, and so much that I find interesting about the Donovan Mitchell experience was in Utah they started out playing two bigs. And they kind of just kept downshifting to the point where, it became this regular season juggernaut that in the postseason they just said, Rudy, solve everything. And like to some extent, like with the addition of Niang, with the addition of Strus, the Cavs are kind of doing the same, except they're saying, Jarrett and Evan, please solve everything. Like, do you think that, like that, just the fact that the Cavs have that generational defender at the 4 in Mobley next to Allen, kind of like how much do you think they can paper over? Do you think that or do you think they'll kind of run into the same problems in miniature that the Jazz ran into defensively in the postseason?
I think this year is really big for gauging the long-term viability of the Mobley-Allen connection. I think there's a lot of people who understandably talk about moving Allen and kind of seeing what it opens up for Mobley and kind of giving him more space. But yeah, as you mentioned, it does put a lot of onus on Mobley. I think the benefit that Mobley has over Gobert is even already there's a lot more to his game offensively. I don't know necessarily if he's like a more impactful player than Gobert was at his peak offensively yet because of the screening and how good of a finisher Mobley was, but you see more flashes of the scoring from the elbow, the driving. You saw a lot of, I think one of the things that people kind of ignore last year because of how much Mobley struggled in the postseason was how much better he got as a regular season offensive player. He got much better as a finisher. I think he improved his screening a little bit, more self-creation, and the numbers all bear that out. And so that's kind of the thing for me is when teams went small against the Jazz to kind of go offense first all the time, Gobert couldn't counter that because he doesn't have the back to the basket. He doesn't have the face-up game. Whereas Mobley maybe does, right? Maybe he can make, okay, you're going to try to play a 6'8" guy at center and go 5 out. I'll just crush you on the inside. Like I'll run pick and rolls with Donovan and Darius and all that. We'll have the spacing around them and really punish you for that. So that's where I'm curious if that's the route that Cleveland takes. But I really do think this is a huge year because Jarrett's a great player and there's nothing against him. He's just not the long-term prospect of Mobley and probably won't have the same peak. Obviously, as an all-star, appearance under his belt, unlike Mobley. But I really am curious to kind of see what they can do with this core because, as I was mentioning earlier, like what is that trade-off of having a core maybe play less and giving more minutes to Strus and Niang? So
to me,
I do see the parallels for sure.
Yeah, to me, it kind of like if you're starting Max Strus and you're saying like on our, we kind of think this is going to be our best lineup. Like obviously Strus might not finish every single night. Maybe we're in a postseason series and Okoro is finishing. We don't know, but I think in some way this is kind of the stress test of like how hard can we push that big man pairing on defense? Like how can we still be a top 5 defense in the league with these two bigs that are elite defenders at their positions, even if we're running Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, and Max Strus for heavy minutes alongside them. And I'm going to be real interested in that lineup data as it pours in over the course of the year, because that's one, if you did have a criticism for this Cavs team right now, I would say that I don't really know what their like no doubt killer 5 lineup is still. Mm-hmm. Like we didn't leave the offseason with that answer. Like maybe it's Strus, but like, that's quite a dearth of perimeter defense out there. So I'm super interested to kind of see how far that pairing can take them on the defensive end.
And I think too, the question here is what, and this isn't to put all the pressure by any means on Donovan, but also like what defender and version of him do we get? The one that we saw to really open last year when I thought he was pretty dang good and solid overall, or do we get the one that we saw in the postseason the last couple of years where he's getting his butt kicked by Jalen Brunson and can't really offer any sort of resistance at the point of attack, and then also too, like what does playing with such size behind Max Strus do for him, right? Like Bam Adebayo is a great defender, but there's no mistaking the fact they never really had a 4 in Miami, right? That rangy 4 to kind of
close
down more space. So
it was Jimmy Butler.
Strus played about 30% of his minutes at the 4, so that kind of proves the point.
Either rotating through Kevin Love or Haywood Highsmith or Jimmy Butler, all guys that like aren't really known for playing the 4 or being really effective defenders at the 4 in this stage of their career. In the case of Kevin Love, and I guess Haywood Highsmith is a pretty good defender, but he's more of a 2/3, I think, than a 4 ideally. So that's where I'm kind of curious as well. But yeah, I by no means am I wanting to say this is a make or break year for the Cavs, but I do think it will be a really informative year for them, because it is hard for me to say it's a make or break year when you have this much talent that's still under contract and is fairly young, entering their prime. But I think it is a really informative year for what the vision of what the Cavs try to build around and really, get back to the mountaintop, or close to the mountaintop, in the NBA playoffs.
Yeah, I just feel like they have more options to go to, right? Like I think that was one of the biggest issues in the playoffs was they just didn't have lineup versatility. Like the core 4 with Okoro, that worked really well. With Karis LeVert in there, that was their best lineup from a net rating perspective throughout the year. But they didn't have a lot of other looks you can go to. And I think having someone like Georges Niang that you can play at the 4, I think that's going to be interesting because you look at it, right, even from an offensive rating standpoint, Mobley and Allen together, that was the best offensive rating out of all the kind of versions or combinations that you can play. Like when it was just Mobley, the offensive rating was worse than when the two of them were together. Same goes for when Allen was on his own. And I think some of that was we just didn't have a lot of options to go to when you kind of shift down to those smaller lineups. So do they end up pairing Niang with Okoro so that you have better point of attack defense when you might not have as much backline help with Niang there, right? Like there's so many questions like that I'm really interested to see kind of how they're deployed. But with Niang in particular, do you think kind of the best use of him is to have him as like the third big that stretch 4, just kind of playing more small ball, or do you envision using him more kind of as the Lowry market and large small forward, even though he's not a 7-footer, more traditional height, he doesn't necessarily move like a 6'7" wing.
Yeah, he certainly lacks the size and fluidity of Lowry, and also much lesser gifted as a wing defender. But the idea that not that you guys are confused, but if anyone's trying to like stand parallel, just the idea that that you have 2 backline enforcers to kind of cover up any mistakes. that either one would make was kind of where I was drawing the similarities, but they end there. But I see him mostly as a 4, but like I said, I do see worlds where he can play the 3. Where he can run some of those slide screen actions for Garland or Mitchell, let them get downhill, or even maybe they're running staggered actions with a Mobley or an Allen rolling, or both of them rolling, things like that. So I think he's best as a 4, and I'd imagine the numbers reflect that as well. I know Clean the Glass does a good job of tracking like your net rating or your team's net rating depending on the position you play. I haven't looked at them, but just having watched basically every game Niang play for the Sixers, I think they're generally better with him with the 4. I don't know how often they played him with the 3, but they also kind of had that weird wing group last year with Tobias, Tucker, and Niang, who were all kind of 4s, but sometimes had a masquerade as 3s. So it was a weird group on their own right. But yeah, I think
we're used to that. We're used to that. Between Lowry, Dean Wade, Lamar Stevens, there's a lot of 4s that have played the 3.
The Sixers and Cavs are using a bunch of 4s as 3s. It's kind of part. I guess it's part of the creed of the franchise these days for them. But he's best as a 4. But I do think the prowess of Mobley and Allen and the playmaking talent and shot making talent of Garland and Mitchell gives you a little more leeway than maybe what we saw in Philly. That's also never, much like Miami, never really had that roaming 4 alongside Embiid, right? I think, they kind of did, I guess, if you want to say Simmons offered that size for a few years, but it was a different type of position. But the last couple of years, at least, they haven't had that roaming 4 since Niang's been there. So I am really excited to kind of see what Niang can do in a different context, even if he's kind of playing a similar role to what he's done most of his career.
Something we've we talked about with this Cavs offseason is that even though they addressed their biggest weakness, which in our opinion was 3-point shooting, they really didn't address the rebounding. And you go look at Niang, who's probably going to play a lot of minutes at the 4 for them. The rebounding numbers are not good. I think some hopeful among us have pointed out that he's played almost his entire career next to Rudy Gobert and Joel Embiid, and it's kind of hard to get. Those guys eat a lot of boards. What should Cavs fans expect from him there? Is he a do your job kind of guy? He'll box out, but he's kind of famously got that body type where he should be a good box out guy. But like, is he, or is this going to be a thing where the Cavs already were, they finished after the All-Star break and obviously in the playoffs dead last in defensive rebound rate. Is it going to be more of the same in the minutes Niang's on the floor?
I think you're looking at more of the same. I mean, he's a 6'7" 4 who can't jump very well. I mean, it's just I think that was the biggest gripe that a lot of Sixers folks, whether it's writers, fans, analysts, and I think it's a totally justified gripe for sure, criticism, however you want to frame it. But but as we mentioned before, even for all the offensive rebounds the Cavs handed Mitchell Robinson last year, they still didn't really have true issues on the defensive side of the floor. So the hope would be, even if those persist, that they're not sinking the ship, and you're really kind of the offense is working a lot better. So I wouldn't expect Niang to quell any rebounding issues, but I do think he can help a lot in the ways that we've already discussed.
Yeah, and I think you can get the help in other areas, right? Like if Allen and Mobley get a little bit stronger, get a little bit better on the glass, not like they're not good rebounders. Mitchell's a pretty good rebounder for his size as well, just kind of chip in, team effort. And I still kind of get a little bit of a feeling that we're in a position where we've been the last couple of years, which is Cavs need Dean Wade to play well, because when Wade is out there, all of a sudden, all the rebounding numbers are great. He's just this net rating god for them. And you don't want to be in a position where you're like, okay, the Cavs, they got all these guys, but you need Dean Wade to be healthy. But I still kind of feel like the backup 4, just the lack of options there is something that I have my eye on. Obviously, you can't fill every single one of your holes in an off season, especially when you don't have a lot of resources to work with. But whether it's Dean Wade as that third string power forward, or maybe having a look of Isaiah Mobley playing a little bit at the 4 as well, maybe they're able to smooth that over and get the support they need. But hopefully the support they get from those guys is as good as the support we get from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. All right, Jackson, we got to talk about the Sixers. things are a little bit weird for you guys, and I'm going to start with a really general question. Can this season be salvaged?
I have a tough time seeing that. I think, just for all of Harden's faults, the playoffs or just the struggles there. He did make the Sixers pretty dang good. He made life for Embiid a lot easier offensively. He made life easier for Tyrese Maxey. He's just a really good player. On the court, he was a borderline All-Star, borderline All-NBA candidate, I think, to an extent. And just, one of the 10 best, passers in the NBA, probably conservatively there. But I think that loss is pretty tough. I think the Niang loss is tough. Like I said, I don't know, I don't think Niang was one of their 3 or 4 best players, but the way he opened up lineups in a way that PJ Tucker didn't, and that's not to say PJ Tucker didn't offer good things. He's not a guy the team tended to guard a lot in that corner, whereas Niang, you had to shoot above the break and things like that. And then you look at, the loss of Jalen McDaniels, who gave you some kind of much needed athleticism and range at the 3 and 4, and you lose a guy like Shake Milton, who could offer you some ball handling depth, and they replaced him with Patrick Beverley, but Patrick Beverley is a different type of reserve guard than Shake Milton in a lot of ways. So I think they were really good last year. They had a chance to make a deep run and obviously fell short. I just have a tough time seeing them be anywhere close to the stature they were last year with Harden out of the fold, with Niang Niang's absence now providing much less flexibility in lineups. I think there's a lot of pressure on Tyrese Maxey to develop. There's a lot of pressure on can Nick Nurse really provide you a huge step up from Doc Rivers, who I thought honestly was pretty dang good last year. People, he has his faults, and I was never one to necessarily, shy away from critiquing some of my, my fault, my frustrations with the way he did things. But I thought he was really good last year. I think he pushed a lot of good buttons. And so I am skeptical that Nurse provides some major boost that closes the gap from Harden's absence, Niang being gone, less ball handling depth, and PJ Tucker a year older, things like that. So I do think maybe the argument could be that, okay, Tobias Harris has always been a guy who's better when he has more room to kind of operate and more chance to touch the ball. I don't know if that necessarily works, but that could be an argument in their favor. I'm skeptical, but yeah, I think, this team, once Harden came back from injury, I think in early December, played at a 58, 59 win pace. And I think they won 54, 55 on the year. I think they would probably be lucky to get 50 this year. 50 is hard. It's just, I don't want to say I don't want to downplay that, but when you're trying to win a title and you've got a top 5-7 player, whatever you call Joel Embiid, you're looking for more than just being a 51 team as your ceiling for sure.
In terms of, you listed all the reasons why things are not looking so good for Philly. If they were to salvage their season and they were to have a really strong year, is there a road that doesn't involve Tyrese Maxey becoming a full-blown star-level guard?
Yeah, I struggle to see one at all. I think somehow the only way is there's some weird way or world where Harden has a turn of heart, because admittedly he does seem like a guy who's a little fickle in terms of his convictions and whatnot. That's not a criticism. It just seems to kind of be the reality of the last few years. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if we're looking at a world where somehow the Sixers are really good, that's got to be one of the slight possibilities, I suppose. But yeah, I think there's a lot of I don't want to use the word pressure, but yes, there's a lot of eggs in the basket of Tyrese Maxey helping keep the Sixers, I guess you can say, title window. It feels hard to call anything a title window when you haven't made it out of the second round. You're just not close to you're just not that close to title contention, I think. But yeah, I think if they're going to be anywhere as good as they were last year, and again, I do think despite that Game 7 flame out, that was a really good team last year. To push a really good Celtics team to 7, that pushed a Heat team that was really, really good in the playoffs, and was a year removed from its own Eastern Conference finals appearance, is a testament to all 3 of those teams, of course. So yeah, I think it's got to be, can Maxey become more of that legit primary initiator type of guy, right? I think he's really, really good playing off of Harden with his blend of speed and shooting. But the playmaking hasn't been there. He's not super comfortable kind of probing in that mid-range. I think one of the things that I've learned the last couple of years watching the playoffs so in depth is how important that mid-range area is. You don't have to necessarily be a killer there, but you have to be super comfortable operating from there. I think you look at a guy like Jamal Murray, a guy like Jalen Brunson, obviously Chris Paul for all those years, Devin Booker. These sorts of guys are really comfortable operating there. And that's something that Tyrese Maxey hasn't necessarily developed yet. And so I think that would be the big key for him. So I don't really see a world where his growth from above average starter to someone in the all-star conversation. I think that's kind of where you're trying to go, and that where you would like him to go. And that's how you would be able to maybe mitigate the loss of Harden and Niang and Milton and whatnot, and having PJ Tucker a year older, Embiid a year older, things like that.
Yeah, it's hard to go from, banging your head against a second round ceiling to saying, okay, a little bit of internal growth as we lose James Harden. If they do, in fact, lose James Harden, that's going to get us over the hump, right? But I am curious with Max, because he is someone that I really do like. I like him as a player, but I've always seen him as kind of...
He has killed the Cavaliers.
He plays great against the Cavs, but I've always kind of seen him more in like the Ant Simons, Colin Sexton off guard role, right? I don't know if he necessarily has the playmaking chops to, be that lead guard. Do you think that that's something that he can add to his game, that he has that type of upside when it comes to playmaking? Or is his best role maybe, continuing to play off guard, secondary playmaking, and running more the offense through like Joel Embiid as a central hub?
Well, I think his current best role is certainly that off-ball scorer, just kind of a wonderkind as a secondary scorer. I mean, his efficiency the last couple of years has been pretty ridiculous. I think since Harden arrived, he's averaging something like 22 on 62% true shooting with pretty good playoff numbers as well. But you did start to see some pretty noticeable growth as a playmaker and decision maker before Harden arrived, obviously, because he was their primary point guard. Him and Seth Curry handled a ton of ball handling duties, which is a pretty strange, weird to say looking back now. Seth Curry's a nice player, but him and second year Tyrese Maxey as your best ball handlers is probably not a great place to be as a team. But you did see some good stuff. I think there was a lot of people that tended to praise his assist to turnover ratio his first couple of years. But I think that kind of belied how good he was as a playmaker. I think it kind of underscored his risk aversion, but you've seen him at times get better about trying to try some more stuff, things like that. So I'm excited to watch him this year. I think he's really because let's just assume that Harden is gone. I mean, he said it himself, so I don't think it's even an assumption, but I'm excited to watch him play that starting point guard role. Assuming they don't get some really, really good starting point guard in place of Harden, which doesn't seem likely. I want to see him continue to grow. I want to see him to get more comfortable probing that mid-range area, keeping his dribble alive at mid-pressure, stunts at the nail, things like that. So I think it's kind of his optimal role, like you said, Justin, is right now that off-ball guy. But I can see a world where he's not a superstar initiator, but the blend of his ability to work on and off the ball very comfortably does put him in that star status on top of his continued defensive growth. I think he definitely got issues defensively and isn't necessarily a positive, but I think he's a fine guard defender. I think he definitely gotten better in certain respects, but he's not super long. He's not super tall, of course, so always can be limited in certain ways. But I'm really encouraged by him, and I think this could be a big year for him, for better or for worse. Maybe he just doesn't turn out to be a guy who you want handling the ball at times, but his shooting off the dribble does seem pretty great, especially from deep. So that can kind of mitigate a lot of maybe mid-range discomfort or discordance and playmaking limitations. But I do think if he does handle that starting point guard role, you'll see a lot of growth as a playmaker, even if he's not like the level of even a guy like Donovan Mitchell as a playmaker who is below a Garland or a Trey or a Harden, but is still very good in his own right. But I think let's say he could be like a B- B type of playmaker among starting point guards. That would be pretty good. I think it'd be a step up from the C- C+ range I'd probably have him in now.
So I think it's probably time to rip ye old Band-Aid off, because you mentioned a Harden return and kind of what it looks like, and this isn't like the other Harden exits where his value was very high around the league. Even when he was traded to Philly, Ben Simmons was considered a worthwhile piece, and Philly sent value to go get him. It kind of feels like the entire league has kind of collectively decided, like, are we sure we want to be in the James Harden business? Given, all the baggage that comes with it, and like not that much success in the biggest moments, especially as he's, entering the twilight period of his career. What's the best case for a return here? Like, like Morey held his cards with Ben Simmons. And he laughed his way to the bank. He made a great deal. So Harden, for even considering what's happened now, I still think it was a good deal, especially given how poorly the Ben Simmons era has gone. Do you expect the same? And like do you think he's gonna get the same level of return?
No, I don't think at all. I think especially just like, because as you mentioned, the playoff issues are what really I hold on to. And I think Harden in his prime and his peak, some of that stuff was overblown. Like he had a lot of really, really impressive playoff moments, but the way he approached and just kind of his style in Game 6 against the Heat 2 years ago and Game 7 against the Celtics this past year, it's hard to have a lot of faith in him being a guy who's so central to what you do and rely on him so much in these moments. So I think he's lost a lot of value there. I think the best case, and you never want to root for injuries, but I think the best case is the Clippers stumble out of the gate, PG or Kawhi misses some time, and they're off to like a 6-12 start. And these cast role players that are best kind of around stars aren't really be able to fill in the gaps. And so, Ballmer and Lawrence Frank get kind of antsy, and they may move off their position. They won't trade, a pick or Terrence Mann or all that. And so you get some, smorgasbord of Mann, Powell, maybe a Covington, maybe that first round pick. And I think it's 2030 they have available. It's way out there. It's maybe even a pick that, for a year that won't even exist. But I think that's your best case scenario, right? Like just kind of some of those Clippers role players add some depth, hope that, like you said, Terrence Max can become a pretty good primary ball handler. Then you've got a Norm Powell who could kind of fill Maxi's role to an extent. I think they're different players, but Norm Powell is very similar, that he's really good getting downhill and really good shooting the three ball, but pretty limited as a playmaker and defender because of his size. But that would kind of be similar. And Terrence Mann would give you some nice physicality and downhill scoring. They definitely need more range and athleticism on the wing. Covington, even though he's much, declined a lot from his peak, is still a pretty useful defender, especially off the ball. Maybe he get back to 36, 37% from three rather than, I think he had a down year last couple of seasons from three, but I don't think that would necessarily vault you back into that tier with Boston, Milwaukee, where I thought the Sixers were last year, but it's certainly a better reality than where they look to be right now with probably starting Maxey, Melton, and then you have a Harris, Tucker, and Embiid, and then you've got I guess Beverly, House, and Reed off the bench. And I think those are all pretty useful guys in certain regards. But if that's the kind of all the depth you have, you're in a pretty tough spot. So adding some depth and maybe hoping that Embiid can finally stay healthy for a playoff run and maybe learned, from some of his own struggles this past year in the playoffs to really kind of be an MVP level player, into the playoffs as well on both ends. That would be kind of the goal for sure. But that's kind of the tippy top, I think, shakeout for the Sixers, but I don't think that's probably what's going to happen. It seems like maybe Mann and maybe not even Mann. So I don't know. It just
it's hard, man. It's hard to find because the market seems so cool. It does seem like if I'm Daryl Morey, I think all I can do is let this drag into the season and wait for a market to develop, because it's not with the Ben Simmons deal, it was like he had offers and those offers weren't horrible in the offseason. It doesn't really seem like there is even a market right now. I mean, if Terrence Mann is a maybe in some of these reported negotiations, that's a tough starting spot. And do you see any other teams you just kind of look up and down the association at who would kind of take a crack? It's the Clippers and maybe the Lakers get reckless because they do have some tradable salary. But is there anyone else that you even see that even logically makes sense, even if they were feeling a little frisky?
Yeah, I'm probably getting pretty limber here, but just based on the fact that like
Get limber.
yeah, I can do it hypothetically. I can't do it in reality. But I think like something involving Levine. I know the Bulls, and it seems like he's available. Maybe the Bulls want to. I mean, they're a team that could use some more playmaking. Maybe they're like, DeMar's a free agent after this year. It's all the Bulls are a very weird franchise because I could see them wanting to.
You're just kind of banking on the Bulls being bullsy.
Yeah, but it's because I could see them wanting to be, okay, let's kind of start fresh, but then they just sign Vooch to not a bad deal necessarily, but it's a lot of money tied up still. But I could see that maybe. I think that would be pretty good, but I still think you're looking at a weird fit where like both Levine and Maxey are better as off-ball scorers and have some playmaking limitations. I think Levine's limitations are much less pronounced than Maxey's as passers, but certainly not guys who can set up Embiid the same way Harden could. Maybe somehow you're able to get like maybe it doesn't seem likely at all, but like is there a world where like they end up with Dame somehow? They move Maxey somewhere else and they recoup some picks for that. Like I don't know. This is all like very, very like.
Would you be happy with that? Like you think like going all in on Dame, would that be the type of thing that would get them over the hump? Just kind of considering that they wouldn't have a lot, like they don't have a lot of depth to begin with, and they kind of cashed in what they had for Dame. Like for a long-term health, do you think the upside is there? Like even in the short term?
Yeah, I think it's tough because you never want to necessarily like assume or speculate, but it does seem like maybe they're starting to have to face the Embiid wandering eye clock a little bit.
Yeah.
And so like maybe that's even worse. Maybe like Dame was great last year, but what if he starts to fall off a cliff all of a sudden, and then Embiid makes it even easier because there's no Maxey and there's no picks. Things like that. So I don't know. It's not a situation I want to be in. Obviously, Morey has his own culpability in putting himself in this situation, but and that's not to say that Harden hasn't exacerbated on his own, but
like anything, there's always multiple points of failures and shared blame.
The situation, the responsibility contains multitudes. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a fair point that maybe you don't want to go the route, but it is also it's hard to necessarily fault Morey in this wild possibility of pairing, Dame Lillard and Joel Embiid. It's like arguably the best. Cool. It's arguably the best pick and roll. I guess let's say Steph. I don't want to downplay Steph, but second best pick and roll player in the league with a guy in Embiid who I think was like the highest volume pick and roll player last year as a roll man and had one of the best points per possession as a roller. So and he's just a much better scorer than Harden at this stage of his career. Lesser playmaker, but I think you could survive that trade-off for sure. So, I think it's a fair point in all regards. But again, we're talking pie in the sky hypotheticals. I think the even of the slightest of realities would be the one involving Levine and the Bulls. So maybe a 3-teamer that sends routes Levine to the Sixers and some stuff and a pick to the Bulls from the Clippers and then Harden to the Clippers. So. But who knows? I think the most likely outcome is something involving the Clippers and Sixers where both sides get a little desperate and maybe concede a little bit, or one side gets desperate and concedes 3-4 weeks into the season, a month into the season.
Well, as we're taking this leisurely stroll down a hypothetical lane, let's get your take. We've been doing this throughout the team previews. I want to get your rankings for regular season rankings for what you think the top 6 in the Eastern Conference is. Who are the 6 teams you think will avoid the play-in this season?
Yeah, so I think Celtics and Bucks are right there. I think the Cavs seem like a pretty good bet for all of the stuff we talked about with their playoff woes. I think they are going to be really good in the regular season again. To yet to be seen if that translates to the postseason like they intend. But I would expect them to miss it, or miss the play-in. It's weird to say miss the play-in as a compliment, but or avoid the play-in, I think is probably the best way to frame it. I think the Knicks have been a team that seem to have a lot of durability. Brunson and Randall don't really miss time, and they're really good volume players. I think obviously Brunson is more than just a volume player, but Randall's a very good kind of floor raiser at the very least. I am kind of curious to see.
Yeah,
I am curious to see kind of if he can enter the postseason healthy. I know he had his struggles against the Hawks 2 years ago, Randall, but maybe not playing on a bum ankle might help him a little bit. But who's to say? Wasn't like that was his only issue in the playoffs. But I think there. So that'll be 4, and then God, other than that, like it's tough to see. Like, I mean, the Heat are such a like even if they get Dame, they're a team that kind of seems to prioritize long-term health. Even though Jimmy's great when he does play, he's a guy that likes to take some time off. Not like in game, but just take some games off.
Yep.
And their depth wouldn't be great if they got Dame. I'm not saying they shouldn't get Dame by any means, but you would be pretty low on depth. So one injury might hurt you even more than it did the last couple of years. I think the Hawks are. I like the Hawks a lot this year, relatively speaking. I think Quinn Snyder's a much better offensive mind than Nate McMillan. I like kind of the development of maybe some of the young guys, and Okongwu and Jalen Johnson, AJ Griffin.
I harbor fear. I harbor fear of the Hawks in a weird way. They just kind of feel like that team that everyone's bored with, and their vibes have not been so good the last couple of years. But it's like you look up and down the roster, it's like a lot of pretty good players. Like they should be pretty good.
Yeah, and then I'm trying to think. Like I'm not a Nets guy. Like I think they could have a pretty interesting defense, but that offense was
easy, Justin.
Pretty atrocious.
Justin. Justin hates the Nets.
I don't know why.
They just weren't good. Like good post trades last year. And that makes sense. They traded away Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but like the offense was terrible, and like they don't really have a lead ball handler. Like I think Mikal Bridges is a very good player who could maybe be in the running for All-Star consideration next year, but he's not like a primary initiator. He's very limited as a passer. They're just not like I don't really think they're a playoff team next year. So I mean, like I think
where are you on Indy? I
like Indy. I like Indy. I think Indy's a team that should compete for a playoff spot, but it's hard for me to put them in that top six.
Yeah. I've noticed you haven't put the Sixers.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I would put them in that tier with like the Hawks, where I could see it and maybe like I'd bank on it over the Hawks, but like I expect this to be a 47, 46 win team, which is where I think the Hawks could be. I think the Magic could be up there too. The Magic played 500 ball. I think once Markelle Fultz came back, that it's a good Eastern Conference. The Pistons are trying to be better. I think some of the moves they've made should help Cade Cunningham, and he's obviously a great player in his own. Ulmer is going to be a great player. I think he's good already. I like people. I don't want to. People are sleeping on the Hornets, but I do think the Hornets could be okay. Like LaMelo missed a lot of time last year. Like obviously Miles Bridges seems like a pretty wretched human, but he is a good basketball player, and if he's playing, he's going to help them. Like that's just the reality of it. Unfortunately, I think Mark Williams can take a step.
Love
if
Mark
they play,
Williams.
Yeah, I've been actually watching a lot of stuff on him the last few days to write something, but he's impressive too. If they retain PJ Washington, that would be pretty nice as well. So it could be derailed a bit by maybe they try and kind of really explore what Brandon Miller is as a creator. That could hurt them somewhat, but like that's not me saying I think they're going to be a top 6 team, but like I don't think they're going to be a pushover. They won 27 games last year, and they didn't have Miles Bridges. They had half of LaMelo Ball, who were probably their 2 best players. And so again, I don't like Miles Bridges as a person, but he is good at basketball and is going to help them win games, assuming he is of the caliber he was 2 years ago.
Yeah, they were in the play-in two straight years, right?
Yeah,
and they added good young talent like Mark Williams. Makes sense.
I think that there's a pretty bunched middle. Yeah, it's tough for me to look at like the Eastern Conference and like see a lot of teams that are tanking, and I think there's a pretty big middle class. But I think for now I will go with the 5 teams that avoided last year, the top 5 teams last year, and then put Atlanta in place of Brooklyn. But that could be subject to change if Miami gets Dame. I think they'd be very good. But as of now, I'll throw the top 5 seeds last year plus Atlanta. But I wouldn't be surprised if anyone is basically set for Washington snuck in there. I don't think Washington's going to be terrible. I don't think they're going to be good, but they have a lot of NBA players in their roster.
Now you're getting into, you know what? I just appreciate every single team, and you know what? I appreciate them so much. I can talk myself into them being good. No,
I can't talk myself into them being good, but I think they have too many competent NBA players. Usually, when you're tanking, you have a lot of like fringe guys or bad players getting a lot of minutes. Maybe they go that route with their young guys, but I just don't think there are really going to be any big rollovers next year in the Eastern Conference, which kind of goes back to my point about it's hard to project maybe beyond even 3 or 4 deep in this conference.
We respect Denny in this household. I like his game. So You have Milwaukee and Boston at the top, right? Like those were your top two. I think it's fair to say those are the teams you have most confidence in for the postseason, and probably Miami as well, just given the success they've had. Is there anyone else you have in that mix if we're talking like postseason confidence power rankings?
Yeah, Miami's a tough one because I think one of the strengths of their roster last year is they had a lot of ball handling depth, whether it was Vincent, Jimmy. I guess were missing Tyler Hero, but Jimmy, Vincent, Strus can handle the ball somewhat. He's not a guy you want running 7 pick and rolls a game, but he's a guy in a pinch on the second side, can do some stuff for you. Then they lost obviously 2 of those guys. Lowry's a year older. I don't want them to extend Lowry. He was really good in a bench role after that 22, 23 minutes per game rather than the 30, 32 he was playing when he first came to Miami. But obviously if they got Dame, that would change the calculus considerably. But yeah, other than those top 2, it's tough to have a lot of confidence in anyone. I think like Cleveland and New York probably earn a lot of respect there. Like Miami, I want to put up there as well because Jimmy's really good and Bam is really good. And maybe do they get a better shooting year from Duncan Robinson? Because a lot of their struggles last year was just the fact that they went from like the best 3-point shooting team in the league to one of the worst, and then kind of it leveled itself out in the playoffs. So if they're more of like a 37% 3-point shooting team, they're probably pretty good again. If they're the 33, 34 that were in the regular season, they're probably going to be jockeying for a play-in spot and needing a Max Strus explosion to overcome the Bulls in the elimination game.
Not happening anymore. He's ours. He's ours.
Yeah, exactly. It'll probably be Duncan Robinson this time, or Tyler Hero is. I guess Tyler Hero did play in those games, but still. So I guess if I had to rank it, I'd go Boston, Milwaukee, Cleveland, New York, Miami. I think those top 2 are in a tier, and then the next 3 are in a tier. And then probably the Sixers in that tier as well, but kind of in a second half of that tier almost. I like Cleveland more than the Sixers heading into the year, just kind of based on what we know about both teams currently. Chicago, it just doesn't really inspire me much. I think they're solid. Their defense is really impressive. I love watching Caruso. Levine's a really impressive, versatile scorer, but I think they're just very much capped when one of their best players can't play because he's going through a ton of really disappointing injuries, Lonzo Ball. So that's kind of where I think there's a top 6 roughly, I'd say, but then like I mentioned, I think any of Indiana, Detroit, Chicago, Toronto's in a weird spot. I don't know. So that's where I'm at. There's a lot of kind of middling teams that I think could all jockey for some of those spots, but I like that top 6 of Boston, Milwaukee, break a tier, Cleveland, New York, maybe break a tier, then Sixers and Miami, or break half a tier between New York and Philly right now.
Yeah, I mean it's exciting for me because the Cavs are still going to have to prove that they're not going to beat themselves in the postseason, right? I think a lot of what happened in that series was, inexperienced guys, the processing speed of Evan Mobley, which has always been kind of one of his calling cards since he's come in, just wasn't there, right? There were plenty of opportunities where, even just in the short roll where he'd normally find Jared Allen for a lob, I'm thinking about this a little too much, and it's half lob, half shot, and it's going off the rim, right?
Literally no one played well.
If you would have told me 2 years ago that when I was watching Evan Mobley as a prospect that my biggest takeaway of his from his first playoff show was that he needs to improve on the short roll, I would have been very, very surprised. But that's what happened. Yeah, he just got sped up. His footwork was weird.
Our listeners are going to be absolutely sick of me bringing up this fact, but I just love watching people's face. Have you seen on NBA.com what his points per possession was as a roll man in that series?
I'm going to say 0.47. I don't even know.
Yeah, it was 0.09.
Yeah, that's not where you want to be. I think his true shooting was 47 or something.
It was a really, really rough series.
That's what gets me so excited because I'm I don't think that's going to happen again for Evan Mobley, right? I think these are all guys that are going to respond to that sort of thing, and it's just exciting that Boston and Milwaukee are really good, but both of them have questions as well, right? It's a good Eastern Conference, but there's no tried, tested 100% every single year. We're going to be a contender. We're a juggernaut, and you're going to have to knock us off like the Warriors were during the run in the Western Conference.
Yeah,
that doesn't exist, right? There's an opportunity in my eyes for the Cavs that if they catch fire and everything starts to click, you don't know how far this thing can go.
Yeah, and I think just on the Evan Mobley topic, one, I wrote about his short roll stuff at Uproxx. When anyone listening wants to read that, I think you can just search like playoff lessons, Evan Mobley, Uproxx, maybe toss my name in there and you'll find it. But I really just think like getting that floater from about 10 feet would open up a ton, because like a lot of times with guys on the short roll, you talk about the passing is the issue, but I think kind of his lack of scoring was the bigger issue in the short roll. So just getting that little push shot down would do wonders. I think it would really kind of slow his decision making, kind of quell some of the anxieties that go through his head maybe when he's on that short roll. Would make things a lot easier. And then also just like I have a tough time seeing Jared Allen botch positioning as much as he did again. Like he's usually a guy so technically sound, usually in the right spot. Just he was constantly overhelping against Julius Randle, a guy who like is completely content to take tough shots. He was letting, or even Jalen Brunson, who liked to take tough shots, he was letting them create advantages before they'd created them. It was a very weird series. It's not to say that the Knicks didn't have a great strategy and the Cavs don't have faults, but there's a lot of stuff that it was just like they were clearly not responding well to adversity, which is maybe an indictment in its own way that you have to address. But definitely some stuff you can address that isn't just, like as a Okoro somehow get like great shooting gravity. Like you can, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but that's okay. They got Georges Niang and Max Strus, and maybe Isaac Okoro can be more of a selective rotation guy with his versatile defense and cutting and all that.
Yeah, fun fact, I believe Isaac led the team in plus minus in that series.
He did. He was the only one that was a positive he in that rating department.
But, anyway, so something I did want to just ask you, like, to kind of take it, back wide before, we start wrapping this thing up. The last 2 years, Justin and I have kind of felt like it's our obligation to, like, remind you, as this team's kind of been on a trajectory, to remind everyone how young they are. Hey, this team's young. They're gonna lose stupid games they shouldn't lose. They're gonna blow fourth quarters. They're gonna build big leads, and then they're gonna give them up. They're gonna do young team things.
They're going to lose a series that's going to just annoy the hell out of you.
And my question, really, to both of you, at this point is that still the case? They're not going to be playing a single player in their rotation that is in their first or second year. Their youngest guy will be a third-year player that's playing for them in Evan. Most of their players have been in the league 3 to 7 years. Should we still view this team as a young team that we have to be patient with, or are they at the level of seasoning that we should start raising those expectations on a night-to-night basis for them to start excising some of that young team stuff?
I would say patience should still be adhered to, but it needs to be accompanied with progress, right? Like they can't bow out in the first round, even if it goes better than it did this year. And you can't still say, Evan Mobley's in year 3, Darius Garland's in year 5, Donovan Mitchell just is entering his prime, and same with Jared Allen, like that. Like they have to I think obviously the goal was to at least win a playoff series last year. But, after you reflect on things, you can see why they maybe weren't prepared to do that last season. But this year, I think you have to make the second round. You have to be competitive in the second round. And if you don't, then, you're going to have some pretty big questions to answer about the roster, right? Like, I'm not, it's tough to know necessarily why this team might fail, or say why they failed in this hypothetical second round. But you can see a world where maybe the Evan Mobley, Jared Allen pairing just doesn't have enough spacing and offensive utility. So maybe you have to reflect upon that. And so, I think patience is still something you should adhere to and practice, but the Cavs will also have to show progress. It's been 2 straight years of progress, right? You think about, they went from one of the worst teams, and then because that's how they got out of Mobley, and then they nearly made the playoffs, and then they made the playoffs pretty easily, won 51 games. And now the next step is like, can you show that like it's not just making the playoffs, it's being a team that, people are talking about individually and things like that. So patience with progress is how I would frame it. And it's like I said it way earlier, it's a big year for this team, and I'm optimistic about them, maybe to a fault, because I've kind of always liked this core, but I do think this team is going to be really good, and not just a team that is a regular season analytical darling. Obviously they won 51 games, but they had some net rating indicators that had people really optimistic about them beyond that. And that certainly didn't prove true.
Yeah.
Or prove indicative would be the proper
Yeah, and I remember even last season when people are like, well, like most teams with this net rating, they're a contender. I'm like, they're not. Like the inexperience, like you have to have reverence for the teams ahead of them that have way more playoff experience. That didn't excuse what happened against the Knicks, right? But I agree with you. Like you need to have patience, but there needs to be higher expectations. You need to see that progress. They need to win around. Like there's going to be times in the future, even if they get this together, even if they had a conference finals run, there's probably going to be times that are frustrating, right? Like even you look at Tatum and Brown, first 2 years conference finals, but then first round exit, you have some mistakes. LeBron James, who's one of the greatest playoff performers ever, 2007 didn't look great in the finals, right? Like not a lot of answers around him. 4 years later, shows up in 2011, and there's still some mental hurdles there. There's still mistakes because he was just so young and had so much success so early on. Guys are uneven, right? Like they're humans. You're going to make mistakes, and especially when you're talking about guys this young, you're going to have times where it's frustrating and they just don't play up to their own standards. But you need to see that forward progress. You need to be at least executing at a level where you can kind of make better assessments of, okay, well, is it process? Is it execution? Is it fit? Like so many things went wrong in that series that it's just like, okay, we've got to, improve the context around them and give them another chance at this to really figure out what we have. But I definitely think there's still going to be growing pains, but I do think it's fair to expect more of this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think like, and this is such a cliche, but like winning is really, really hard. Like, I think, of course, the Cavs and this core want to win a title or make an NBA Finals appearance, but it also might just top out at a couple of conference finals appearances or 4 or 5 series wins. Like, that's not to like throw.
You can draft an MVP and still like top out as a second round team, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's not to throw water on kind of this enjoyable flame that they have going, but it's just the reality of things. I mean, you look at you even mentioned the game a couple of years ago when when the Celtics had the injuries to Kemba and Jaylen Brown that kind of derailed their season to an extent. But even last year was a disappointment for them. Like they were trying to be on a revenge tour, and they bowed out in the third round. Excuse me. Weird to call the third round. It's called the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't know why I said that, but it's just how it goes. Like the Cavs might just end up as a team that makes a couple of conference finals, and it doesn't mean fans can't be frustrated. You can't call it necessarily like a letdown from what they wanted, but like that's just how it might end up. And I'm not trying to have anyone brace for that reality, but it's one that might just come to fruition. So.
I think it's just a reminder to enjoy the regular season and enjoy what you have right now, because
for sure.
That's what Carter and I said after LeBron left was we just want to have like a grit and grind era. Like that would be great if you had sustained success over like a 7-8 year period where we have, because like I always compartmentalize regular season and playoffs because there's this 82 game stretch of multiple months where I'm spending 3-4 nights watching my favorite team. And are they making me have fun over 4 or 5 months? I think that's an important thing. Like, I think for a fan, like it's great when your team makes you have a really nice time a lot of the time. And there's a real value to that. And I think this is a team that can get over the hump. And I think this is a core that can do some really special things, but I just plan on trying to enjoy the hell out of what we have in the present, because we've seen teams that look like they have massive runways not have runway, and weird things happen. So just cross our fingers and try to enjoy every moment we get.
Yeah, and I would say too, like I think maybe some of the like fans might say, "Oh, we did that last year, and then so now we're always going to be apprehensive for this next year if we win 52 games again." I think maybe the way to be shifted too, to like look for things throughout the regular season that you think could prove why this year is different, why they could be a better team in the playoffs, right? I think that's like, as someone who understands that like the regular season is not incredibly correlated all the time with the playoffs, that's what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for like, okay, why is this team maybe prepared well to thrive in the playoffs? Why is this team maybe have some weak points? And so if you're a Cavs fan and say, okay, we won 51 games last year, and then look what happened. I don't really care about that again. Just look for games, moments, possession, sequences that say, okay, this is why I think they're going to be better prepared in the spring this year against whoever they play, and why they should be, actually a team that reaches the second round and beyond, or why I should have hope. And I don't want to kind of treat this as a redo of last season.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I mean, if you're a Cavs fan or if you're an NBA fan, you should absolutely be reading everything Jackson does, following all of his work, because I think nobody does a better job of breaking down those nuances and whatnot than you do. As Carter said, you've written some of my favorite Cavs features over the last couple of years. So we really appreciate you taking the time to sit here and talk with us. And before we let you out of here, anything you got coming up that you want to plug?
Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'll have something on Mark Williams, I think, over at SB Nation this week.
I got dynasty stocks on him. Let's go.
If you're not familiar with his game, he's a pretty fun young center, some defensive talent, some little bit of offensive versatility. I think he should be pretty fun next year with LaMelo Ball back in the fold. So other than that, I think I actually will have another Cavs thing this week. I've been doing this playoff lessons thing. I think this one's going to be on Darius Garland, so I'm going to rewatch those games this week and kind of see what I can find there. Obviously, like I said earlier, I wrote about the Evan Mobley struggles at Uproxx too. So the Garland thing will be Uproxx. Mark Williams, which is probably less relevant to these listeners, SB Nation, but that's all I have down the pipeline, I think, in the coming days. But yeah, I appreciate you two having me on, and I always enjoy talking about this Cav group.
Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it. And really appreciate everyone that tuned in live on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of a review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.